I want to first start off by making it very clear that this is USW and it's everybody's union. And so I understand as a freshman member of Congress, my name is Frank Mrvan. I represent Gary, Indiana, the 1st Congressional District in District 7. So the USW represents 850,000 working men and women employed in metals, mining, pulp, paper, rubber, chemicals, glass, auto supply, energy production, industry, steel, along with growing number of workers in healthcare, public sector, higher education, tech, and service occupations. I tell you that because I know you already know that, but I was the first member of Congress, I think, in history that was sworn in with a USW mask on because I was so very proud to be placed there by your hard work and belief in working men and women. I must first, of course, thank the International Executive Board for this opportunity. The USW International President, Tom Conway, who is from my district. Not from my district, but he worked at 6787 at Burns Harbor, along with Vice President Dave McCall. So I have a great amount of scrutiny on performance as a member of Congress to make sure I live up to those expectations. And also, Tom and Dave, if you have any relatives still in my district, if you can call, I need their help to knock on doors and to make phone calls for me. I also want to absolutely positively thank, in my eyes, an advocate, a fighter, someone who walks around with a grace and dignity, but with a big stick, Director Millsap, who made it perfectly clear to me, when I was endorsed by the United Steelworkers that he had no time for part-time friends. He had no time for an individual who would waffle, and he had no time for someone who was ever dishonest with him. And I have lived up to those expectations from day one, and I thank him for his friendship, and more importantly, for the belief that a young man from Hammond, Indiana, who had a grandfather as a steelworker, who replaced Pete Visklowski, who was a working man's champion and a steel industry's champion for 36 years, could live to fulfill and make sure we advocate for the steelworkers and provide working families with opportunities. To you, Director Millsap, I thank you very much. I also want to make sure I recognize International Vice President Roxanne Brown for her wisdom and help as a member of Congress, her involvement and engagement. Thank you, Roxanne. And a shout out very quickly to the impactful, effective National Rapid Response Director Amber Miller and National Coordinator Randy Pearson. Please give them a round of applause. It is the Rapid Response is a Steelworkers nonpartisan grassroots educational communication and action program that provides the necessary structure to inform every USW member about pending legislation that impacts and is concerning to labor and work-related issues. Rapid Response provides an opportunity for all USW members to have a strong voice and an active part in our government decisions and legislative actions that affect them, their families, their contracts, and their communities. Here's what I want you to know. Rapid Response brings members together in educational ways. It unifies your voices in the halls of Congress. It strengthens the steelworkers' power and effectiveness. And so here's what you need to know from a member of Congress. Please continue to understand that it works and keep up as a delegate. The emails, the calls, the petitions, the postcards, keep the pressure on to make sure you get the government you deserve. So it's important for me just to share a little bit about who I am and not take a lot of time about it. One, I am from Gary, Indiana, Northwest Indiana. I was born and raised in Hammond, Indiana. My grandfather came over from Czechoslovakia. He went directly to Inland Steel and worked at Inland Steel as a United Steelworker, part of Local 1010, for over 53 years. He provided an education. My grandfather provided an education for my father, who went on to become a state senator, provided for his family health care, a pension, and it was a part of our community. This is what you need to know. I was born and raised in a community, and I saw in the 80s and 70s what bad trade policies could devastate a community and devastate workers. That is part of ingrained in who I am. And so as you grow up from that region, it becomes a part of you. So when Director Millsap and President Tom Conway talked to me about the very importance about strong trade policies and how it impacts people's lives, I've seen friends of mine, dads, lose the dignity of work because no control of their own. So when I'm in Congress and I become the co-chair of the Steel Caucus, it's just not a piece of legislation to me. It's not just a letter. It's an understanding that I know real people's lives are impacted by bad trade policies. And so I, as a member of Congress and the co-chair of the Steel Caucus, make sure that we have strong trade policies, make sure that we have written letters to the International Trade Commission, that they have the resources to be able to implement and regulate trade, because there always are going to be bad actors and corporate greed that are going to try and circumnavigate or simply go around our trade policies, and to be able to make more money off the backs, no matter where they have to go on the planet Earth, to find cheaper labor so they can increase profits. Those things are what we have to look out for. And as a member of Congress, humbly, a freshman member of Congress, I know I have had an impact on making sure that we get the resources to the International Trade Commission. And now, as we have talked about, making sure we enact Level the Playing Field 2.0. Level the Playing Field 2.0 is nothing that I want to see pass because I think that we are going to have to face it. It is because I want to make sure, as I had walked the halls and union halls, and I have witnessed members of the USW say to me, "We have your back," that you understand Congress has your back. If there are conditions beyond your control that members of any labor union lose their jobs, you want to make sure that the TAA and Level the Playing Field 2.0 creates that opportunity to rebound, creates that safety net issue. So we have to make sure up front we have the trade policies that protect the jobs. Two ways I earned the endorsement of the USW. One, very humbly, and it's a great lesson to learn and something to talk about. In Local 7-1, who represents one of the largest oil refineries west of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi in my district, there are 2,500 jobs, 2,500 working families that work there. About 6 years ago, they went on strike because the corporation was trying to make part-time and contractors more important than the workers. They were making unsafe work environments. And so 7-1 went on strike. And I was merely a local elected official who was a township trustee who was responsible for 180,000 people to make sure that they were able to get back to work and to eliminate unemployment. My job was to make sure that we provided emergency assistance. So what I did when they went on strike after 60 days is I put caseworkers in their office in the union halls to work with families to make sure they had access to the hardest hit fund, which kept them in their homes for those who didn't have the resources, and also allowed them to apply for health insurance because that was the first thing to go after 90 days. But I was in those union halls and I saw people who said they never thought they'd be in the position, and they thanked me for their help. But more importantly, I learned what it means when someone says one day longer, one day stronger, and what it means for union brotherhood and sisterhood to stand together against a major corporation that was trying to break their backs and divide. And it was through unification that I learned the value of a union. And then the next lesson I learned, as 5333, it was a Chicago aluminum plant. Because of trade policies and because of lack of enforcement of circumvention about bad actors in other foreign countries loading the aluminum market, there were steel workers who were out of a job. So I sat with them and we tried to find them new employment. So that's what I mean by the trade policies have to protect individuals up front. It's too late when I'm testifying, as I have done 6 times, in front of the International Trade Commission to protect your jobs, to protect American workers and domestic manufacturing, it is too late when I am testifying. We have to be able to protect it up front. So as a member of the Steel Caucus and a co-chair, one of the first things we did was send a letter to President Biden, ensuring that we kept in Section 232, making sure that we protect the steel industry against overcapacity, making sure that we made efforts to make a level playing field so that countries like China that subsidize their steel by government subsidies overcapacitate to keep people working and to keep the market going, then flood our market, reduce our prices, and reduce our workflow. Those are things we have to fight against, and that, as a member of Congress, what I have done for the steel industry and for United Steelworkers, and I will continue to fight for that. So now we have to talk about, well, what about the future of the economy? We've seen what you've done for steel, but there are a lot of workers. The infrastructure bill that Tom Conway, the next speaker, Secretary Walsh, we came to Chesterton, Indiana, and we talked about the infrastructure bill. Now, the infrastructure bill is a great bill, but what makes the infrastructure bill a phenomenal bill is a strong Buy American provision. And that Buy American provision advances jobs and the steel industry and domestic manufacturing for the next 10 years. That Buy American provision allows us to say that when we are investing in the United States of America in roads and bridges and airports, broadband, removing lead from water for clean water, what we're getting in return is we are investing in the American worker. We're making sure we're using American products to do that. And we will fight like hell to make sure that our American domestic manufacturing base comes first, and we will not be circumventing when it comes to Buy American provisions. Next, the CHIPS Act. Was a proud co-sponsor of the CHIPS Act. And I want to go back to the infrastructure bill for just 1 second. Indiana alone will receive $8 billion over the next 10 years in infrastructure. Illinois will receive almost close to $10 billion. I'm not quite sure what Wisconsin and the other states in here, but what I'm trying to tell you is the infrastructure bill is the first major investment that we have had in 50 years in infrastructure, and we are going to use American-made steel and products to be able to do it. The CHIPS Act, why it's important. I just want to create the ecology or the system of which I find very important about the CHIPS Act. One, it's an investment in research and technology that our country hasn't seen in a very long time. It's $50 billion in making sure that we produce chips and semiconductors here in the United States and are less reliant about foreign countries. What we have learned through the pandemic was something that was very clear: to shorten supply chains and to understand that the American domestic workforce is so vitally important that we must have the ability and the capability to produce chips and semiconductors for national security issues, for our auto industry, for our appliance industry, for our tech industry. And we were the beginning, we were 40%. We developed those chips and semiconductors. Now we're less than 8%. This piece of legislation invests in not only research and development, but it invests in, again, the American workforce. It invests in technology and STEM, and it shortens the supply chain. Here is the ecosystem that I have communicated for over a year. I represent auto workers who work right outside in South Chicago, right outside my district, who live in my district. When the auto plants stopped making automobiles because they could no longer have chips, they stopped working. When the appliance manufacturers could no longer make appliances because they don't have semiconductors and chips, they stopped working. And when they stop producing cars and appliances, the steel industry stops producing steel or slows down producing steel. So the American CHIPS Act shortens the supply chain, invests in American technology, and it allows for our workforces to continue working without disruption and to be able to produce an American good, and it is good for national security. I also, so I'm on education and labor, and I'm on veteran affairs. I want to take this opportunity because over the last 2 years on veteran affairs, we have focused on making sure veterans receive world-class health care. And I don't know if this has happened yet, but I'd like to honor any veteran, men or women, if you'd please stand up so we can give you a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you for your service. And those are simple words to say, but tying everything together, any person can give a great speech for 5 minutes. It's in your deeds. It's in what you accomplish is what matters. And so for our veterans, we just passed the American Honor the Pact Act, which allows for veterans who served since 2001 who had exposure to toxic burn pits and toxic fumes, presumptive medical benefits. It is what was Agent Orange in the 1960s and 70s and 80s to our Vietnam veterans. It is what the burn pits and toxic exposure to that is to our current veterans. It allows them to receive those benefits and make sure that all working men and women and all American veterans receive those. So what I'm trying to tell you is we've talked about the American Infrastructure Bill. We've talked about the CHIPS Act. We've talked about providing health care for veterans. And as working men and women in labor, we passed the PRO Act. I was a co-sponsor of that piece of legislation, how vitally is important to make sure that union members have fair elections, that union members hold corporations accountable for disrupting those things. And we have to come together to be able to pass that and get that, sign that into law so that you have fair and equitable legislation to allow you to organize and to go forward, making sure there are safe working conditions, good paying wages, good pensions, and good health care. And in closing, on Friday, this coming Friday, we will go back and I will vote on the I'm sorry, that's my little faux pas. The Inflation Reduction Act. And what the Inflation Reduction Act means to me is that first and foremost, for the first time in decades and almost history, it'll allow us to have the Secretary of Health reduce and negotiate drug pricing. It will cap for our seniors a out-of-pocket cost for $2,000 when it comes to prescription drug costs. On an annual basis, it's about $10,000 if they have Part D. It allows us to look at the climate and the environment. It looks for a just transition, and it allows the American workers an opportunity to participate in that economy. And it allows for corporate individuals who pay zero in taxes. Corporations that are building rockets to the moon and are paying less taxes than steelworkers will now pay 15%, which will allow us to reduce our deficit and allow us to reduce inflation. So I ask you to pay attention who votes for and who votes against that, because that is a workers' piece of legislation. That is a lift up the middle class piece of legislation. That is something that helps our seniors and allows us to go forward. So as I said in closing, it was an honor to be here. I want to thank President Conway. I want to thank Director Millsap. I want to thank Jerome Davison for literally getting me in a chokehold and making sure I hit these key points and talked about these major important issues. But I want to speak directly, if I can, for 30 seconds to my District 7 representatives who are here today. I'm under attack. I'm under attack because I stand for working men and women. And I have billionaires, the Koch brothers, pouring millions of dollars into my district because they want to be able to buy a position. They want to be able to buy a member of Congress and be able to convert that from working men and women representation for someone who breathes, sweats, and works every day to make sure there are equitable opportunities, health care, pensions, good working environments, and replace that with someone who will look out for their interests. So today, above all partisanship, what I'm asking you to do from now until November is to understand who is there for your interest when it comes to working men and women in the steelworkers. Who is there that has passed an infrastructure bill, who passed a CHIPS bill, who passed a PRO Act bill, who reduced drug costs, who reduced Medicare costs, who impacted our senior citizens with an increase in Social Security. I ask you with the passion in my heart to make sure, if you believe that I'm that representative and you live in District 7, to knock on a door, to make a phone call, to email. I don't care if you write it in the beach, cut your grass with a letter, but I ask for your help and your vote, and more importantly, one day longer, one day stronger. May all of you have a wonderful convention. God bless the United Steelworkers and all that you do for the United States of America. I'm Frank Mrvan. I'm the 1st Congressional District member. Thank you for this opportunity.
I got these gifts.